Welcome back to part two. So we talked about the Declaration of Independence. I mean, you have this entire Bill of Rights. You have rights that are written down. We're talking about now rights that come from both natural law and the positivist tradition. You have the right to defend yourself, Amendment 2. You have the right to publish, Amendment 1. Thanks to this. I mean, you have the right not to publish. Negative rights like that are also natural rights. You have, or rights just in general. You have the right to be left alone. Amendment 4, one of my favorites. You have the right to your property. You have the right not to be tortured. You have the right not to testify against yourself. Again, negative rights are rights as well. You have the right to speak as you wish. You have the right to keep silent. You have the right to keep troops out of your home, thanks to Amendment 3. These rights are posited. They're written down, ratified, they're accepted in the first 8 amendments of this document. But I hear some of you say, Mr. Parker, these are natural rights according to the definition. Yes, they are. But this brings us to the next bit called substantive due process. But before we get to that, the framers, even in their wisdom, said, let's have a 9th amendment. It says, just because we've listed the rights in the first 8 amendments of this Constitution, it doesn't mean that those are the only rights that we have. And there are other rights that we have that are way too numerous to list. Way too numerous. I mean, you could do this all summer and still not run out of rights. So when rights come from both camps, they fall into a third area that's called the substantive due process. Translation, what is substantive due process? Human behavior so integral to the happiness of the individual that we're going to make it that much more difficult for the government to interfere with that behavior. Does the government try to interfere with that behavior anyway? Absolutely. Absolutely. I hope if you've learned nothing else from this class, the system we're operating under now, the system that was laid out for us, and how far we've come from this document. I hope if you leave with nothing else, you leave with that. So it's not impossible for the government to interfere with our rights, but it's more difficult because it's codified here in the Bill of Rights. If Jefferson, was to be taken literally, speech to a right to a speedy trial, these are inalienable rights. These are part of us because we have the dignity that every human being has. And, well, he's not taken so literally, as we know. So can you shout fire in a crowded theater? Yeah, absolutely. You can if the owner lets you. If the owner, and I mean, I'd live here in Lincoln, there is a private theater, privately owned theater, old gentleman runs. If I walked up to him and said, hey, I want to conduct an experiment. I want to shout fire in your crowded in a theater tonight whenever they let shows start resuming. That thing's been shut down for over a month now. And he says, okay. Well, he let me do it. The guy who owns the rights to the property, who is the owner of the property, yeah, you certainly can. Now, if he said no and I did it anyway, I'd be in a lot of trouble with the Lincoln Police Department. I probably wouldn't be let back in that theater. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. So after the 14th Amendment, Congress was taken to mean no government at all, federal, state, local, county, any level. So what is substantive due process? I'd remember this term. And how has it made it harder for the government to interfere? Okay, so there are 2 bases that make it harder for the government to interfere. There's a rational basis for a law. Okay. So, like if we need to reduce the speed limit in front of an elementary school because cars keep running by and running little children over during recess because the speed limit outside the school is 50 miles an hour. Okay, that's a rational basis to say you can't drive as fast as you want through a school zone because there are children playing uh, pretty much all day. Okay, that makes sense to me. That would probably make sense to most people. Uh, yeah, let's reduce the speed limit. You can go 15 miles an hour in a school zone in front of whatever elementary school. Strict scrutiny, this is a much heavier burden. So this is like choosing a person to marry, your right to have children and raise them how you'd like. These are very integral things. These are very important, very, very sacred things in many Americans' books. Should the government be able to infringe upon who someone wants to marry? If the government had come up to me, well, that would be 5 years in June, uh, 5 years ago, nearly, and said, you can't marry Mrs. Parker, well, they would have had to have shown a very compelling reason. They were trying to interfere with that right. And this happens from time to time. I mean, maybe not with the marriage thing, but your right to have children, your right to raise them how you wish. How much more important? I know most of you don't, but some of you do have children that are listening to me right now. You would throw a fit if the government came in and said, you can't raise your children this way. You have to teach them about this, that, and the other thing, and then they have to pledge allegiance to Donald Trump and swear undying loyalty to him. You wouldn't stand for it. You couldn't stand for it. I can't imagine anyway. But it has to show a really compelling reason. It's a very high bar. The government can sometimes meet it. About why it's trying to interfere with that right, like marriage or children, and that its interference is the least restrictive alternative available. So they can do that sometimes if they pass a strict scrutiny test. So some courts will call natural rights pre-political. Why? They want to avoid sounding too religious. This is usually a final exam question, or whenever I get to an exam question. They want to avoid sounding too religious, so natural rights are also called pre-political rights. Why are they called pre-political rights? They were with us before any government existed. Humans had these rights coming out of the primordial ooze, if you will. So if states, again, coming back to this question, repealed the First Amendment, and we're getting to that next, we'll do the First Amendment next. Do we still have the freedom of speech? Positivism, no. Natural law, yes. And where does this leave us? Well, because there is a way for the government to get into substantive due process and make some of those really personal, really restrictive decisions. Natural rights, unfortunately, are not inalienable. Should they be? That's a discussion for another day and something you have to decide for yourselves. If the government has a way to attack a freedom, it's going to do that. The rights of the individual are certainly on the decline, and is the primacy of the individual still paramount? It should be, but it isn't. Again, what we've got and what we should have. But let's go back to Thomas More and apply our learning. Now, hopefully you know that this is a movie clip I'm about to show you from A Man for All Seasons, which is a great movie, one of my favorites. Well, no, my favorite. What's going on with the computer? So this is not the trial of Sir Thomas More that happened in reality, but it's a good second. I don't own this.
do solemnly swear the evidence I shall give before the court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
So remember, he's on trial for treason. He knows he's going to lose. He's talking to us for posterity. Positivism, right? The law is whatever the lawgiver says it is. So Parliament passes a law, says Richard Rich, this one was an actual guy, too, is King of England. Okay, he's King of England. The Tudors are out. Why? Parliament has the authority to do that.
Yes. Then he said, but I will put you a higher case. How if there were an act of Parliament to say that God should not be God? This is true.
What of it? What about it? What do you think? Remember the time that this is supposed to be taking place. God cannot be God. Okay. Can a parliament legislate that? Absolutely not. Is that a natural thing to say or to believe? No, not at that time anyway. Is there any sort of way to make any sense of that? No. Universal Catholic Church. That the Pope spoke and God's voice came out. Yeah. So King Henry could not be the king, the head of the church. It was an unnatural thing to happen. So that's what I have for you on natural law. I hope you got something out of this lecture. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or threats, feel free to reach out. All right. First Amendment is up next. Bye.